Well, thank you for the songs this morning. We're going to be going to Genesis chapter 1. So we began a new series in going through the book of Genesis. So we'll be looking at chapter 1 here in this message this morning. This is message number 2 of this series, entitled Setting the Stage. And we'll be looking at this whole chapter. I'm just going to read verses 1 and 2 to start. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So Genesis 1 is the account of the creation of the universe here called the heaven and the earth. And we're quickly confronted with the question of how to read this account. In other words, when we turn open to Genesis chapter number 1 and we're reading the words here of this chapter and going into chapter 2 and so on, how are we reading this? Is this literal history? Is this allegory with symbols and images, but it's not specific and literal terms? Is it mythic poetry? And a lot of these questions that we are confronted with. And we should read it as literal history. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. One is that is the way the other biblical writers and Jesus himself read the book. So I did just a quick count. So this wasn't a thorough search, but just a quick count revealed that somewhere around about 60 times, and I have a feeling it's probably more than that actually, in the Old Testament books outside of Genesis refer to the book of Genesis. And if you turn into the New Testament, you will find that over 200 times Genesis is referred to, it's quoted from, the people, the events, whatever they're referred to, over 200 times in the New Testament. So the book of Genesis is one that many other biblical writers refer to in their things that they have written. So when you read that, the people and the events of Genesis, including the creation account here, are always referred to as literal historical events, places, and people. So when you look at how the other writers of Scripture read the book of Genesis, and particularly the creation account, we discover that they always treated it as literal history, as this is what happened, this is how it happened. These were the people involved. Adam and Eve are always referred to as real historical people. So that's one reason, and I believe a very good one, why we come to Genesis and we read this book as literal history, including this creation account. And another reason why we should read it as literal history is because of the purpose of this book. So in the giving of this book, God is making himself known and he's making his works known. All right, God is not simply here giving us poetic and fanciful sounding imagery and phrases. He's actually revealing himself and his work to us. And also, we have to keep in mind that Genesis is the first book of the Pentateuch, those 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, that were essentially all written together as a set. They have a continuous story, a continuous history that goes through them. And so this is the first of the book of the Pentateuch, and particularly Genesis is recording the origins and the early history of Israel for them to take into the promised land. So this 5 books, these 5 scrolls, are what Moses gave to the children of Israel. They're on the plains of Moab before they're going to enter into the promised land, because Moses wasn't going to enter into the promised land himself. He was going to see it, but he wasn't going to set foot on it. He was going to die. And so before he dies, he delivers them these books, Genesis again being the first of that particular collection. So this is the origin and the history of the nation of Israel and the promised land. God is the creator of lands and of nations and has every right and every authority to give it to whom he pleases. So when we understand the purpose of this book, as well as how the other writers of Scripture read this book, then again, we have every reason, with no indication in the book itself, to take it otherwise than literal history as it is presented. Now, Genesis 1 covers the 6 days of the world's first week, the creation week. The chapter has a definite structure and a pattern to it. So the chapter is organized around the days 1 through 6. And the account follows a definite pattern. So you have some sort of an announcement and a command. So we'll be told, God said, or and God said, and then there'll be a command, let it be, or let something, whatever the case may be. We'll find that the pattern also shows that there's a confirmation that God said, God commanded, and it was so. The confirmation is given that just as God had spoke, these things happen. The pattern also involves a judgment. It was good. It was according to God's purpose. It was what he wanted to make it. Now, oftentimes, we might set out to try to make something and lack the skill or the patience or the tools or the materials or whatever that it is to make what we wanted. And a lot of times what we set out to make doesn't turn out exactly like what we wanted. Sometimes we think it's fit for nothing but be thrown in the garbage. But that was not the case with God's creation. It was good. There's a judgment of what God made. And then the pattern also includes a time measure. So we have evening and morning, first day, second day, and so on. So throughout this chapter, that's a pattern that repeats for each of the 6 days of the creation week. We also have an alternating pattern in what is given to us here. God creates, and he creates, first of all, 3 realms. So days 1 through 3, on each day, God creates what we might think of as a realm. And in the next 3 days, God creates inhabitants for those realms so that those realms are populated. So the first 3 days, we have the realms of the cosmos, which we think of as space, the sky and the seas of the earth, and then thirdly, the dry land of the earth. These are 3 different realms that are going to have 3 different types of inhabitants. So the next in the alternating pattern comes the inhabitants for those realms. So we get lights, sun, moon, stars, the things again that we think of in space. We get the birds and the sea creatures in the waters and the seas and in the sky. And then lastly, we get the land animals and human beings. And when you look at this pattern, you realize that there's a correspondence here. The days correspond, the realm and the inhabitants. So day 1, we get the realm of space, and day 4, we get the inhabitants of space, so to speak, the lights, the sun, the moon, the stars. And so that repeats. We get the birds and the sea creatures corresponding to the sky and the seas of the earth. And then last of all, the dry land of the earth is the realm. And then we get the land animals and the human beings there on day 6. All right, so this is the structure of this particular account. This is what we look at this particular chapter. So in this outline, I broke it down into 2 main parts. In verses 1 to 13, we have the theater, and in verses 14 to 31, we have the players. So that's what we want to look at. We'll begin with the theater in verses 1 to 13, and let's begin here with verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So here we have in these 2 verses the statement of the beginning. And the beginning refers to the beginning of the universe and the beginning of everything within it. So this is the beginning of time and space and matter, things that did not exist before this time of the beginning. So what we're being told here is that God not only created the earth, God not only created the heaven, but God created the beginning. God created the time and the space and the matter. He created that beginning, which necessarily means that he already existed. And this is confirmed throughout the Bible. So in Jesus' prayer in John 17:5, Jesus prayed, "And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." And he follows up in verse 24, "Father, I will that they also, whom thou hast given me, be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory which thou hast given me, for thou lovest me before the foundation of the world." So throughout the Bible, we have references like that. Before the world was, before the foundation of the world. And those references are to this time here in Genesis 1:1, before the beginning. Because God is eternal. Jesus Christ is eternal. The Holy Spirit is eternal. So before the beginning, before the foundation of the world, we get a reference in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 20, "Who verily was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you," speaking about Christ and particularly his sacrifice on the cross. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that before this beginning, that God existed. And before this beginning, there was love, there was glory, there was thought, there was purpose, there was will, there was foreordination. All of these things were before this beginning. So it shows that this creation was made by the eternal and personal God. And when I say personal, I mean that he is a personal being, in other words. Now, the word for God that is used here is Hebrew term Elohim, which is a very common name for God. The word itself indicates power and might. It's something that also could be used to speak of rulers in authority of office. So this is not a name that or a title that was used exclusively for God, but it is one of the ways by which he reveals himself in the Bible. That's the word that is used there in Genesis 1:1. And it says that he created the heaven and the earth. Now, that word created is translating a Hebrew verb that is only ever used of God in the Bible. In other words, when you look at the Testament and you see the occurrence of this Hebrew verb, the subject is only God in the Bible. He's the only one that creates in the Old Testament. Now, there are other verbs in the Hebrew and in the Bible for forming and making of things, and those are used of both God and of men as well. So, in other words, this term, as it is used in the Hebrew Bible, indicates that it is used into reference to creating out of nothing. Now, I'm not saying that the Hebrew word itself means that. I'm saying that the biblical usage of the term is that it is used to say God alone creates out of nothing. God also can form and make and shape and fashion out of things that already exist, just as men do. When we take something, we maybe take paints and a canvas and we make a painting, or we take wood and we carve it, or whatever the case may be. We take things that already exist and maybe we turn them into some other form. We mold them, and whatever it is that we do with them. But we cannot create out of nothing. We cannot take nothing and turn it into something. But yet God created the heaven and the earth. And again, through the usage in the Old Testament, this is something that is attributed to God alone, creating out of nothing. That he created the heavens, and the heaven here means the space, and the earth that is referred to is ground or land. And it tells us in verse 2 that this earth, this ground, this land was without form and without void. And you'll notice, first of all, at the beginning of verse 2, you have that word and, that conjunction there. And it actually occurs over 100 times in this creation account. And what it does is that it shows us that this is a linked together sequence in the act of the creation week. And that the earth was without and the earth was. So the earth was created and it was without form and void. And there are a lot of opinions about what is meant by that. But being without form and void means that it was unfinished. It was not in its final form, so to speak. In other words, God created the matter of the earth. And when God brought that matter into existence, it was not in its final form in a globe with the continents and all those things that we think of. When we think of Earth, we probably think of that globe that we saw in the classroom and all those different continents and things that we could see on there. Well, it wasn't that way. God brought the matter of the earth into existence. And the best way to understand it, including what Peter said about it being in the water, that God creates a watery mass, and doesn't have an atmosphere. It doesn't have a spherical shape. It is a watery mass, and in that is all of the matter, all of the material in which God is going to shape and fashion the earth and all the things that he brought forth. We're told in places like Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 27, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth. God setting a compass upon the face of the depth is a reference to this earth being without form and void, and God fashioning it, shaping it, forming it into what we think of as a globe. Then we get to verses 3 to 5, and that gives us the first day. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So this account, not only here on the first day, but throughout in all the days, this account emphasizes God speaking. That God spoke. God said, let there be light. God speaking throughout Scripture and is explained as God creating by his word. So a verse like Psalm 33:6, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. So it is emphasized that God spoke. This creative act was not an act that involved, again, these pre-existing materials. God creates out of nothing by his word alone. And then he shapes and fashions them. So we're told here that God created light, and he divided between light and darkness. So what God does here on this first day is that he creates the sequence of day and night. Now, sometimes people point out, oh, wait a minute, the sun and the moon hasn't been created yet. They don't come along until day 4. So how could there be a 24-hour day here? Well, and that is true that the sun and the moon had not yet been created. But when you read the creation of those bodies, it says that the sun and the moon rule the day and the night, or they divide or distinguish them. In other words, they mark them. In other words, we on the earth, we mark night and day by the sun and by the moon. But that doesn't mean that time didn't exist. God created space and time and matter when he brings all of these things into existence. That also doesn't mean that God could not count 24 hours. This is what God has established as a day. We recognize it as 24 hours of time. Of course, we have watches and phones and clocks everywhere, and a lot of times none of them agree with each other about what time it supposedly is. But the sun and the moon were the primary indicators of day and night from the very beginning. So what God does on the first day, he creates the light, he separates, divides it from the darkness. And by telling us that the evening and the morning were the first day, where there was no sun, there was no setting sun, there was no moon, no rising of the moon, none of those sort of things to mark the day and the night. But God has created that sequence of a 24-hour day. And furthermore, throughout the Bible, night and day are consistently referred to as a 24-hour day. So now we have the first day, and we have the realm of the cosmos being created. Verses 6 to 8, which give us the second day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So what we have here on the second day now is the forming of the earth's atmosphere. So the earth has been formed into a globe, and now we have the atmosphere that is being formed around the earth, being referred to as the heaven. And in terms of as we study out throughout the Bible, we think of this as the first heaven. This would be the sky for the earth, going up, to that atmosphere of the earth. Out beyond that atmosphere would be the second heaven, which is where the sun and the moon and the stars are. And then we're told that God's throne is in the third heaven, which is beyond space itself. Now, this heaven that is created is the first heaven. This is the So the waters above and the below are a separation by the sky of what has best been described, I think, as a water vapor canopy that would have been over the earth. It would have functioned something like a hothouse for creating moisture. There was no rain, we are told, until the time of the flood, which would have been a considerable amount of time later. And so this is what is created here. We have now the realm of the sky and the seas. So we have a definite earth that has been created. We have seas that are evident, and we have the sky. We have the atmosphere of the earth. Then we get to the third day, and this is the next realm, verses 9 to 13. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. So now we have the solid ground of the earth. So the earth is formed into a globe, and it consists of these waters, and it has this sky now, this atmosphere around it, and it has this water vapor canopy that the sky separates from the waters of the seas. So now we read about the earth being, and the best way that I could liken that was that it's precipitated out of the water. So if you can think all the way back to chemistry class and to doing experiments, there were times you'd mix up all these different chemicals, you'd mix up this solution, and it's you look at it and it's a liquid, and you leave it there for time, and you begin to get these solids that are forming on the bottom of it. And that process is known of as precipitating a solid out of that's suspended in a liquid. So maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't help. But nevertheless, out of the waters We have the waters being gathered. We have all of the matter for the dry ground that is there being precipitated out into a solid that the land and the sea are now divided. So now there's land, now there's sea. The land and the seas would be rearranged through the floods, but now we do have seas and we do have dry ground. So now we have this earth here that's referred to. It's the same as the word that's used in verse 1 and 2, and that word can mean the whole earth. It can mean literally ground. It can mean soil. It can mean a particular spot. So it's a lot of variance as to how it is used. But the same word is used, showing us that it's the same matter that was created in the beginning. Is that same matter is used in forming and making the dry land. So what you have then is solid land mass, rocks, minerals, soil, all those sort of things. And then on top of that, we read that God brought forth out of the earth the grasses and the herbs and the trees. In other words, the vegetation, the plant life of the earth. They are formed out of that soil, out of that dry ground. And we're told that they're all reproducing after their kind. So God has so designed the vegetation of the earth to be propagating, to be reproducing after their kind. And sometimes we know that you can take trees and you can join them together and sort of create these hybrids and these sort of things. But again, you take that apple tree and all you're going to get from it is an apple tree. And so that is how that God has created the earth and all the vegetation reproducing after their kind. So now the realm of the earth, particularly that dry land of the earth, has been created. So the theater is ready. So we get to the players in verses 14 to 31. And again, we get this correspondence between the realm and the inhabitants. And so verses 14 to 19 give us the fourth day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So the lights that are referred to, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven. These lights are light givers. These bodies that are going to radiate light, the sun, the moon reflecting of light, the stars, and all of these sort of things. And these are given specifically, we are told, to mark the days and nights and the seasons for the earth. So these are, in other words, these are now the inhabitants, so to speak, of the realm that we think of as space, this heaven, this second heaven that is outside of the earth's atmosphere. And of course, earth is contained within that space, but it is a different realm, so to speak. And these inhabitants are created. Then we go to the fifth day, verses 20 to 23. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth." And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Now, this is the first time that we read this word life in this account. Verse 20 says, God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that had life, and the fowl," and so on. So this is the first time that we read this term, life in the creation. This life is used of animal life, it is used of human life, and it is used distinct from plant life. That they are bringing forth after their kind. Kind refers to a species group, and it describes the nature of reproduction and propagation in the life that God created on the earth. And so now in this fifth day, we have in the realm of the skies and seas, we now have these inhabitants of the skies and the seas. We've got the birds, we've got all of the sea creatures. And then we get to the sixth day, verses 24 to 31. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth after his kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth on the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So now this creation, this sixth day begins with the creation of the land animals. And so with the creation of the land animals, um, the creation is ready for man. The earth is ready for man. We have the dry ground and the seas that have been separated. There's the atmosphere, the water vapor canopy. Everything is in place, all the vegetation, and now the animal life. And so now the earth is ready to be inhabited by human beings. And man, we are told, was created as male and female. And it's just like the animals of the land and of the sky and the creatures of the sea. And this pairing is God's design, particularly for reproduction and propagation of the species on the earth. But we're also told something about man that we're not told about any other aspect of the creation. And that begins there in verse number 26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And of course, it goes on to say that that is exactly what he did. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So man is obviously set apart in this account as a special creation by God, created in the image and in the likeness of God. And again, that is not said of any other aspects of the creation. So the word for image that is used, the word itself means a resemblance, and more importantly, it indicates representation. The point is not so much of what Adam and Eve looked like, but that they are representatives of God. Male and female were created, in fact, as representatives of God on earth. And this agrees, obviously, with the command that he later gave for them to be fruitful and multiply and so on. Now, the word for likeness means a model, or it can mean a likeness of shape or a likeness of manner. In other words, it's a word that indicates a relationship. So this is seen with Adam and his son Seth later in Genesis chapter 5 and verse number 3, as Seth was in the image and likeness of Adam. So being made in the image and likeness of God means being made as representative in relation to God. And again, that's not said of any other beings of the creation other than mankind. Well, then we see that God charges the man and the woman now. And again, so there's something distinct about these creatures that God has made called man and woman. God charged the man and woman, charged them to be fruitful, meaning that they're to multiply and to fill the earth with people. And as we will see in the chapter, this design means the union of one man and one woman in marriage. And that is God's intended order. So there's a sort of a likeness or a similarity to the animal kingdom, but then there's also a dissimilarity in the concept of marriage. But again, we're not. That's in chapter 2. We're not getting to that this morning. God gave Adam then dominion over the earth, the charge of it. It says in verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them," that's male and female, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." So God gave the first man, Adam, dominion over the earth and the charge to subdue it. Now, the word for dominion, it means to rule. It means to subjugate. The word is used to speak particularly of the rule of a king over a realm, like Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 24. It's also used in the Messianic Psalm, Psalm 8. The word appears in verse number 6. That's again describing a kingdom rule when you read that in the context of the whole psalm. It's used of the future Messianic king ruling over the earth in that future time. Psalm 110, verse 2, "The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion. Rule," there's the word, "thou in the midst of thine enemies." Now, the word for subdue is actually a word that is quite similar to that of dominion or to rule. It's used of David in his subjugation of nations he had conquered in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse number 11. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the earth was a created kingdom. The earth is a realm within God's universal realm. God is over all, and his kingdom is this entire universe that he has created. And within God's universal kingdom, there is this kingdom of the earth. There is this realm within the realm that was created, and God gave kingship over this kingdom to Adam. These are the inhabitants of the land of the earth. And of course, we see the significance of being made in the image and likeness of God, meaning that Adam was to have that dominion and he was to subdue that earth as the image and likeness of God, representative of him in relation to him. Of course, we know that Adam failed in that, but we're not to that point of the story just yet. So, let's step back a minute and say, why did God create the world? And we might even especially ask, why did God create the world we see around us? And sometimes unbelievers will use that as a way to mock the creator and the creation. They'll point out numerous problems on the earth between people and nature and various things. Say, "Oh, well, that sure is some creator. That sure is some design that he has worked out." So, why did God create the world? And when we look out around us, um, we see a disconnect here. We see an inconsistency. We read over and over again God said, let there be, and it was good. And he gets all the way to the end of the sixth day, and he pronounces it all very good. And that's the end of his creative work there on the sixth day in this account of the creation. So we read that it was good over and over and over and over again. Everything that God had made, it was judged good. And yet we look around us and we don't see everything as good. We witness the violence of nature, and it can be brutal. We witness the hardships of the hospital, the griefs of the cemetery where young and old are buried alike. And those things don't seem good, and they're not good. So why did God create this world, and why is it the way that it is? Well, we will get to why or maybe how we've gone from very good creation to cursed creation, but that's in chapter 3. We're not there yet. But we can answer at this point, why has God created the world? Why and why the world? Well, to answer this is also to answer why God does everything that he does. So in Revelation chapter 4, verse 11, God is praised, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." So in other words, God created for his pleasure. It pleased him to do so. It pleased him to create what he created in the way that he created, and even the way that things are now. God has revealed to us through his word, even through his act of creation, God only and always does what he is pleased to do. That is what God has revealed of himself to us. This is why we can talk about what God does not do or what God will not do, because God has revealed to us through his word that he only and always does what he is pleased to do. Now, many times when you talk that way, though, people will object and they'll say, "Oh, well, you're limiting God. You're putting God in a box, or something like that." But saying that God does not do something or that God will not do something, that's not the same thing as saying that God cannot do something in terms of ability. Rather, God never does anything that is against his own will. That's what we learn of God. He's revealed himself to us this way. In fact, to do something that is against his own will would simply be a self-contradiction, meaning that God does not exist. But even if God created this world because it pleased him to do so, that we read about in Genesis 1, why has God made the world the way that he has, where pain and suffering and death were inevitable? Well, God's eternal purpose also includes the evil in the world. We read in places like Proverbs 16:4, "The Lord hath made all things for himself, yea, even the wicked for the day of evil." And honestly, it's incomprehensible to us in so many ways. But here's Paul's answer as to why God created the way that he did. Romans chapter 9, verses 21 to 23. "Hath not the potter power over the clay, of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor, other unto dishonor? What if God, willing to show his wrath, and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had afore prepared unto glory?" So, we can say that God created the world the way that he did for the maximum display of his attributes and therefore his maximum glory. And now we have the stage set for the drama of redemption to unfold. And that's all of our message for this morning. And so we will close with the hymn.